Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to today's inspiration session. We call these events Ipsos Insights, with the ambition to hopefully provide you with some insights, some inspirations on what we do and what we specialize in. Today's topic, as you can see on the screen here, is that we'll talk around and inspire around creating and writing winning innovation ideas. And actually, we had some discussions and struggles around what should the headline be, because I think essentially what we're going to inspire on today and talk about today is very high level, so approach and processes around innovation and how to get to the right place to get innovations that will succeed in the market. But it's also about the practicalities and the very hands-on nitty-gritty details on how do we actually write up a consumer-centric concept, for example. So how do we express this to consumers? So we are in a physical and virtual stage, and I'll come back to that. But today on the stage, just make this work. We have 3 speakers. We have myself. I'll introduce myself in a second, but then I'll introduce the 2 other guests that we have. So the first face you see on the screen is Ali, my colleague from UK. He sits within our consultancy business called Strategy3. He will provide a short introduction in a second. Then we have Vadim from Arla, or Yurt. So the subdivision and new brand at Arla around plant-based. So thank you so much, Vadim, for participating today. And then myself, I work in Ipsos Denmark as a client director. As I put here, I am truly an innovation geek. So my background, my bachelor's and my master's has been around innovation and managing innovation and turning it into business development. And also at Ipsos, I have been focusing on innovation for many years. So that is shortly my background. But I think, Ali, would you take just 1 minute perhaps to put a few words on yourself?
Yeah, happy to, Jens. Thank you so much for the introduction. And it's so unfortunate I can't be with you in person today. As it turns out, it was my wife's birthday last night, and she was very understanding. She said, "Look, you can go to Denmark. That's absolutely fine, or you can stay married, but you can't do both." So that was the choice I had to make. But no, on a serious note, I'm Azeem. I'm an associate partner at Ipsos Stategy3. I'm also the global head of growth for Strategy3 across our 20 different markets, trying to see how we can grow out our offers, grow out our people, and grow out our share of what we do, the work that we do. And my background has always been consulting, and particularly in innovation. So I used to be before this role, I used to head up the UK arm of Ipsos Strategy3, and before that I was lead inventor for What If Innovation, which is one of Europe's oldest innovation houses, but also worked in other consultancies, and indeed was involved in the whole startup world for a while as well. So a deep history in innovation and consulting.
Perfect, thanks, Ali. And then Vadim, just a few words. We'll get to hear more from you later. But
yeah, I'm Vadim. I'm in Arla with like 3 years, and I was leading the new brand development and switching to the plant-based, just one of our business units. So I'm very happy to be here and to share some insights and open for questions.
Yeah, cool, good stuff. And I've been working a lot with Vadim on their journey as well. So we have supported on some of the steps, and of course this is from us an inspiring story where you're coming from a big corporation, global corporation, and then you're actually working as a startup within the company to develop something very new. So that is why we thought it would be super interesting to have Vadim here as well. So I'll just give a brief setting the scene introduction, and then the 3 of us will talk a bit as we go along. But what is really important, so today we have people in the room, but we also have people online. And of course, people in the room, please note down your questions, then we'll take them in the end. People online, please type in your questions in the software where you're actually watching the webinar. So then we'll pick them up in the end, so you don't have to sit and remember your questions. Just type them in, that would be fantastic. And then again, another thing is also me here standing looking at cameras and looking at people. It's this is the new reality, I assume. we are somewhat comfortable with it, but we are still trying to figure out whether we can actually manage all the technical elements of this. So please bear with us if any troubles along the way, and write in the chat if something is not working online. Really good. So before we jump into the theme of today, I think it's just important for me to very briefly set the scene on who is Ipsos actually, or what type of company are we. So Ipsos in Denmark is a relatively small unit. We are about 55 colleagues in Denmark. However, we actually come out of a big global organization. So we are more than 17,000 colleagues in globally, and we do have offices in more than 90 countries. And what we basically do is that we help clients get to the real truth, and that goes within societies, markets, and peoples. And what we believe in is that you actually act better when you're sure. Whether that is within innovation, brand strategy, brand development, product development, or other matters. So that could be, for example, employee relationship management, or something completely different. But when you know, then you can better act. So rather than thinking, feeling, gut feel, it's about knowing, and that this is what we provide. We provide those insights to ensure that we can have impact in your businesses. The topic of today is innovation, and even though we are a big company, and sometimes, and I know Vadim sometimes laugh at me that you are big and not always agile, but we are actually nominated or called out as the most innovative research company globally, and this is actually something we are super proud of. But it's also something that, you know, it requires us to be on the toes. So we really try to be innovative, and we try to be agile and not always be the big monster that takes a lot of time and is super rigid. So it was just important for me to call out that we are actually innovative as well. So innovation is, of course, also within our industry. How do we assess? How do we go about methodologies and so on? So our promise for today's inspiration session is, I realize, quite ambitious. So we put in the invite that we will inspire you on innovation approaches and frameworks. We will inspire you on how to facilitate ideations, for example. We will also provide you with inspiration on how things are done at Yurt. And we will also provide you inspiration on how actually to write down concepts. We have tried to consolidate it down to the key elements today. So we will get through these topics, but it will, of course, be somewhat scratching the surface. So if you have any questions or want further dialogues after, then feel free to reach out, and we have to provide more background. During today, I will start out a bit now with the introduction, then I will hand over to Ali in a second, and then Vadim will talk about your challenges, how they go about innovation. And then in the very end, I'll talk about actually writing concepts and how to do that in the best way, just for everyone to have a sense of the flow. One of the reasons why we are having this webinar and why we help so many clients and our partners on innovation from end to end, so spotting the new growth territories to the final validation point where you have your packaging in the shelf, for example, is because we know that innovation is extremely difficult. And we know from the dialogues that we have, among others, for example, with Vadim, that there are a lot of challenges on the road to success with innovation. So, for example, these are just some of the quotes that we have had from our dialogues with different clients. So, for example, that early exploration is difficult. The discovery phase is often skipped. So some people or companies tend to jump to the gun. That might be because they have internally developed the technology. They just want to apply that one, and they know how to do it, and they know in what setting. But actually getting the understanding of how should we position this, and what are the other opportunity areas? Are we actually missing out on a big opportunity because we are too focused on what we just have at hand? There are also other things like we're struggling to be truly creative. So that is often also a thing that we hear, that, yeah, we are marketing teams, we are marketeers, we are innovation teams, etc. But sometimes we struggle to be truly creative. We have our own view on the world, and we look in silos. So some of these elements are, of course, why we today want to talk about how to go about it. And that is why I will hand over to Ali who is online now to talk about what would be, in your experience, Ali, the optimal approach or process around how to actually go about identifying new innovation territories. So I think with that, over to you, Ali, and you should have
perfect. Thank you so much.
Of the slides.
Okay, all right, perfect. Thank you so much, Jens. Well, look, before we get into the topic of how to do great ideation, I think it's worth talking about how innovation itself has evolved. And I think in recent years, we've seen a focus on trying to act a bit more like startups. Words like agile and lean are, of course, part of the vernacular these days. But the reality is that there are reasons why you shouldn't be looking to innovate like a startup. And today you're going to hear three things from me, at least. One is why big companies need to rethink innovation and the way that we innovate. The second is how we need to go from broad to narrow, shallow to deep as a better way to innovate. And then finally, of course, as Jens said, we'll talk a bit about how this looks on the ground in practice. So let's start by talking about how innovation has changed. So if you look going back a few years now, consumer companies, these big companies that we know and love, have traditionally used a very specific type of business model for winning growth. And it was in a world where the relationships were with mass retailers. So you would pretty much only be selling through big stores. You had a mass market, so you weren't looking at specific niches. It was mostly, the same type of product that would go across. You'd have early entry into developing markets, and you would be centralized in order to push down costs. So very, very specific type of situation. And as a result, you ended up with a very linear stage-gated process. And this is the way that most big companies operated for many, many years. You'd start with a relatively simple concept, often coming from R&D, not necessarily from anything else, but in some forward-looking companies, market research and insight and human-centered insight. And essentially, you would spend more money on improving this idea that you were looking to launch, going through market research, going through product development, and eventually going to the market itself. And typically these brands would do quite well. There are, of course, cases where that wasn't the case. New Coke was one of the famous failures, where they spent a lot on market research and product development, but when they went to market, it didn't work. But by and large, this was the preferred way of going out with a new product. However, the world did change. There are a few notable changes in the last 15 to 20 years, and that have been gradually ramping up. Firstly, we're seeing, as you have already seen, cheaper startup costs, easier to set up a business, and many types of businesses than it previously was. You can now see that companies are able to sell directly to consumers and bypassing these large retailers and supermarkets. There is lower investment methods in order to initiate and scale marketing. So whether that's above the line and below the line marketing options have also both become both cheaper, but also going direct again to your consumers and really micro-targeting them makes a big difference. And then finally, there's a greater viability of niche business models. So even if you're servicing a smaller group of people, but in a more meaningful way, you can make a business out of it, and many startups have. And that's what spawned the lean startup approach. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, but the whole build, test, learn approach to product development meant that there was an opportunity for iteration and course correction, typically a more human-centered approach, and allowing for a lot more in-market experimentation. And companies, many big ones, felt that this was the way that they needed to go. And you saw companies from P&G to GE to others all going into this space of trying to be more startup-y. And some of them have had great successes of it. Some of them have struggled a little bit as well, but you can see that this has been the approach. Now, there are some obvious advantages of this, but also actually there are some fundamental problems when it comes to doing this for large companies. The first is that we sometimes need to factor in that there is a wider ecosystem when it comes to startups. So everyone talks about how 2 people in a shed created Google, and that's a very large company. But it wasn't just 2 people in a shed. Actually, there were multiple, if not hundreds, if not thousands of 2 peoples in sheds that were starting up these in the same space. So the ecosystem is something that often gets forgotten. The lean startup isn't applicable to many challenges, and we'll talk about some of the challenges where it's harder to use lean. And finally, lean methodology, it uses the benefits that small companies have, but minimizes the ones that big ones have, which obviously isn't great if you're a big organization. So let's quickly go through each of these. Firstly, the majority of startups fail, and people forget this. Iterating can get you so far, but actually the reason why startups succeed is because many of them are there and many of them fail. So if you look at here, although there aren't stage gate processes like the traditional approach, there are different seed rounds, different rounds of funding, including seed and Series A, Series B, Series C. Now, at each of these phases of funding, you will find that many startups will fail. And it's only a very few that end up making it towards the end. And so when a company says, okay, we're going to innovate like a startup, or we're going to have one, maybe a couple of ideas that we're going to try to push all the way through, the reality is to create that level of scale of ideas that are going out for experimentation is very, very difficult given the numbers. You almost have to create a whole ecosystem, which is very difficult to do in the traditional way that a startup ecosystem works. The second thing is around the challenges of high upfront investment. So if you look at the level of finance that's required in order for this innovation to work, you had the first wave, which was building the internet. This required a lot of infrastructure, heavy investment. You wouldn't find startups in this space typically. But once that was done, actually the second wave of the app economy was a lot more easy. So many companies using things like Amazon Web Services, AWS, other types of things in order to be able to quickly create and scale up products and apps which they previously couldn't. And this also works in the world of products as well. And that's why you could see a real boom in the number of startups that were happening. But many of those industries where you could see the opportunities to very quickly come in at a relatively cheap cost are starting to fade away. You know, it might be fine for a new app or game, or maybe even a ready to drink option, but actually as you start to see things become more integrated and higher requirements for R&D, whether physical or digital, you'll see that actually those costs are starting to go up. And so the amount of investment needed for a startup to do it actually increases quite a lot, making it harder for more of them to be in there. And then finally, as I mentioned, lean methodologies are great for small companies, not so much for big ones. The in-market experimentation carries a high level of risk in terms of reputation and IP, and also giving you sometimes the wrong decisions, sort of metrics that you are looking at. So with that in mind, in-market experimentation isn't ideal for large companies. Large companies are also not able to move quite as fast. As much as we like to be agile, there's typically some sort of first, committee or group that needs to sign off on some of these things, and it can be harder to break away from the way that the wider group is thinking on this. And finally, actually, big companies can afford the capabilities to invest a bit more upfront in the front end, rather than just keep experimenting and trying lots of things until something hits. So why would they just continue to use just this approach? So the question then obviously is, well, how do we create a human-centered approach that's designed for scale for large companies? And our approach to this is bringing in a bit of the best of both, really. in essence, we still try to have that large group, that sort of ecosystem of ideas that we have the ability to look at. But instead of trying to create the whole thing and put it out into the market where you have the risk, where you have the high cost, we found other ways that you can validate and start bringing that down. And as you bring this down, you increase the fidelity of whatever you're creating. So maybe starting with more basic ideas, validating the ones that consumers are feeling hits a problem that they have and does it well, and then starting to turn those ideas into concepts, and then developing them further, and then developing them into visual prototypes, and then early prototypes, and then go to market. And this way you can actually create your ecosystem very much like the world of startups and lean startups, but then also do it in a way that allows you to benefit from the research that big companies can do, and put some real force behind it. And actually, we've seen that this works. This is the great thing about it. Having done some benchmarking tests, we can see that the early innovation testing that we've done around this shows a trial index is higher than average rather than lower than average, which obviously is great for the concepts that skip that step. So it makes a meaningful difference against the average. But also for large tech clients, we saw that the number of failing ideas went down very significantly, from 21% to 13%, an incredible change. And that comes from a better process for big companies to follow. So what is this process then that we're talking about? Well, we call it the inner sprint process, and you can see very quickly here what that looks like. We look at creating that ecosystem and bringing that out through 3 phases. The first is the discover phase, where we're identifying any unmet needs and prioritizing opportunity areas around this. Again, whereas startups may have to kind of come up with their own ideas as to what it is, and maybe do some research or some limited research on it, we can actually start thinking about what are ways that we can see what's going on, what are the trends and futures that are coming up, what is happening on social media, what are people saying, what are the challenges, and we can discover some really great territories, these opportunity areas where we can come up with ideas. So we already know that instead of trying, like startups do, to cover lots and lots of possible avenues, we kind of bring it into, this is the area where there is the most pain or the most interest to change. Let's focus here. The second thing we do is we define. So this is where we come up with what is the solution that we're trying to do. Again, if you look at the startup world, there will be, again, a sort of scattergun approach to everything, build them out, put them out into market and see what comes back. Again, that's not the way that we're doing it here. Instead, we're coming up with lots of ideas, yes, but then we're testing those ideas, bringing it down to the ones that are doing well, increasing the fidelity testing, increase the fidelity testing until we've got a really strong set of a limited number of ideas. And then once we have those ideas really clearly articulated, we then turn those into those business propositions more meaningfully. So in the define phase, we have worked out which ideas to focus on, and in the develop phase, turn those into concepts that are ready for development in the company. And for those interested, this is what that looks like in practice. So we have the 3 phases: discover, define, and develop here. And you can see that this is this first one is around identifying those unmet needs and creating those territories, those innovation territories. Once we've done that, we would then look to create the ideas, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about how we come up with more stretchy ideas. So that means ideating and prioritizing until we have our clear idea set. And then finally, we add the fidelity to those ideas that we really want to push forward with, in terms of turning them into concepts, bringing them to life through visual prototyping, and in some cases beyond that, and then ready for entering into our innovation pipeline. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of the why and the how, but now let's go into the what. What is it that we actually do on the ground, and how do we do it? So when you're talking about ideation, and I've been involved in trying to understand how to get people to think differently for a very, very long time. one of my mentors from many years back, a person called Professor Edward de Bono, who's best known for his books on 6 thinking hats, used to always talk to me about how it's important to understand the way that the brain thinks, and actually that we have these rivers of thinking where after many years of thinking about the topic the same way, because we've got lots of information around it the same way, actually the experts become the worst people at coming up with different ways of thinking, because they're just so used to thinking about it the same way. And he would always talk about the need for both stimulus and provocation in order to get them out of those rivers of thinking. So how do we get them out? How do we get people out of those rivers of thinking? Well, here are a few different areas that you'll often find. So you could talk about related worlds. So this is other industries that you can see that have similar challenges, or may bring some inspiration that you can use for this challenge. You have re-expression, so looking at the problem and re-expressing it as something else. We have revolution, or breaking the rules of the industry and seeing how you can talk about it in a different way. And you also have other areas like, again, a form of, if you like, a random link is celebrity ideation here, where you are thinking about what happens if Kim Kardashian was to launch a product in our space. What would that look like? What would that be like? Is there anything that we want to use from that? And then finally, the trends and futures space, which is to be a bit more forward-looking. Where is the world going, and what can we do? And on the topic of trends and futures, it's worth pointing out that we have our global trend survey, the next version actually, which is launching very soon on the 2nd of November, the new version. But this is a quantitative survey that really understands what is going on in the world across many different countries, across many different trends, allowing you to see which trends are most salient in which countries and what is actually happening behind them. A fantastic tool if you're looking to ideate and come up with new territories. And that is something that we would often use as an input into the way that we are coming up with some of those territories. And I'll bring it to life as an example, because I know we obviously have our friends from Arla on the call as well. You can see here, and this is not necessarily the process that they went through, but just an example to bring it to life, that there are many different trends that link to what Arla is working on, such as the climate emergency, trust in medicine, technophilia, local shopping, and hedonism. You can see that there are many of these different areas that are applicable, and actually thinking about them and coming up with ideas that maybe bring together 2, 3, maybe more of those cards can be a great way to try and see what ideas are being generated to really push the brain out into thinking about something different. So hopefully a quick but useful example of how you can start to think about ideation. And if I leave you with nothing else, please take some sort of inspiration outside of your usual to think about ideation. And when the new Global Trend Survey drops on the 2nd of November, that might be a good place to look at that too. I will now pass it on to our friends at Arla. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. So we were just figuring out how to unmute it on our side, so we are here again. Really good. Just to put a note on the trends, we will actually, the last event we will have of the year, similar to this one, will be, that's typically the biggest event of the year, will be around the global trends. So that will be announced in the coming weeks on when that will happen, but it's going to be in the beginning of December, I believe. So stay tuned for that. With that said, over to you, Vadim. Now we have had a chat from Ali on how to do it. So let's hear how it's done in real life.
Okay. Just before I start with our innovation journey with Arla and plant-based, just maybe first introduction of Arla as a company. Yeah. So yeah, that's good. So it's a number 4 dairy company in the world. So we have more than 9,000 owners in 7 countries. Headquartered here in Viability, Denmark. But we also number 1 company in a dairy company in producing organic products. We have a few global brands, and one of the new one I'm going to be presenting you very soon. So what is going on outside the dairy world? Actually, you can see that the plant base has a staggering growth. We have around 10% like a CAGR until 2025. So in Europe, the overall value of the category will be around 1.5, only in milk alternatives, and more than 2.5 in overall like dairy substitutes alternatives. So why? And we had some discussion before why Arla has a reason to be there, and like being a dairy company, and if we really can deliver something around that. And the answer was immediate yes, because when we look on the data, it's what happens. Like we learned, like 95% of consumers who buy plant-based alternatives, they also buying dairy products. So there is a common misconception that this plant-based is only about very specific people. So actually, we are talking with the major population, and this is the example of the fridge before we launched our brand. That time, that was like we took a picture from our consumer. And the most important one, like Arla is farmer owned, and therefore these are people who live in their land, the people who are like closest to the environment, and the people who really produce the ingredients for the plant base. So it's a huge opportunity for Arla to enter and just not to compete with the dairy, but to complement to dairy. Therefore, the board of directors gave us the permission to establish a completely new standalone brand for Arla, and I will discuss a little bit about how we did this journey. Yeah, first of all, we realized that there are so many brands, and we talk with our consumers a lot. Actually, I wouldn't say brands; it's quite opposite. There are so many products, but not many brands. They're very functional. If you see, only a few brands would really manage to establish this just emotional connection, and for us, we saw this as an opportunity for our brand. And we also realized that all people motivations they tend to gravitate into like three main areas, which is about health, sustainability, and novelty. So that's why while we were creating our brand, we were trying to play with emotions and as well as various functional benefits. So I think it's an open secret that any successful brand should deliver on the product, so on the functional attributes of the products. It also should be very aspirational and to deliver on and address on tensions in people's lives outside the product. So like super important brand to be emotional, and of course the brand should be trustworthy, because otherwise no one would believe that you can deliver on that. So in this case, it is a believability pillar. A small mood video about our brand. So actually, I will discuss afterwards how we create this one, but that's gonna give you some feeling about our brand and what it's all about.
Imagine the ever-changing seasons of the restless Nordic nature. The earth that is eternally choosing what it wants to be. Imagine ingredients grown from the Nordic countryside, cultivated and harvested only by Nordic farmers. Imagine an evergreen product of uncompromised taste and quality. 2 never-seen-before variants. Imagine a brand for the ever-changing, for those that never stay being only one thing. Those who don't want to be defined by only one aspect of life, because they want it all, and they want it now. Imagine a Nordic pure, free, independent, surprising, untamed, uncompromising, ever-changing. Imagine your earth.
So, and it's supported by ever-changing Nordic nature and like pure ingredients from Nordic. So we give people opportunity to be what they want to be. So yogurt is bring lightness to everyone experience without weighting you down. So it's super. Yeah, it's very sad that we cannot see this video with the sound, but trying to.
Yeah. No. Why doesn't it come in your PowerPoint?
I think just click on.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's embedded as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry. It's also not coming out on your PowerPoint, I think.
It's fine, but maybe we can share it like later on. But in the let's switch to another one, please.
Of course. That one?
Yeah. Yeah, and actually we launched this amazing brand in 2 countries for the moment, in Denmark and UK. We're launching in Sweden very soon, and possibly in other countries also. So we started our launch with the 3 variants. We have a clean label, few unassuming ingredient like a product, only organic, only all natural ingredients. We also managed to create the unique visual language for our brand to encapsulate its positioning and to bring this positioning to life. And you can see the different execution from our brand world, very product oriented, and another hero piece is very quite emotional oriented. And some of you might have seen already some like a digital video online. You can also easily find it there. So we already have a few videos there as well. As Ali said before, that we actually there is a conventional approach for the big companies, because we need to over research everything, yeah. And there is another one, a bit reckless approach from these small companies when we have no resources for development. It's quite easy to launch like something. We believe that there is a third way where we can still be agile, but at the same time delivering just on our target. And in this case, I guess in Yort we've succeeded with this one. So, as I tried to explain before, on the functional like a part, we were doing a lot of just immersion project with our consumer in order to understand their motivation, how they use the product, why they choose the product, and on the emotional side, we also try to talk with them outside the plant-based worlds, what's really going on, what worries them, and so on and so forth. Again, on the functional Gibba side, we did a quite conventional Gibba concept and product test, but at the same time, again, we were doing a lot of like visual identity, just immersion to consumer to understand the best semiotics and the best category and brand cues we should bring to life. And last but not least, our comms, which we deliver in the end of this process. So, in a nutshell, so very simple learnings to me. We please don't underinvest in the beginning of the process. We need to go under the skin of your consumers, because we've been doing this in various countries. Please participate in each of the group, because I've been part of all of them. Try to feel them and afterwards, in the middle of the process, please don't overspend in the research, because I guess we tend to overspend here, and it's a bit of analysis of the paralysis happening. We cannot move forward. And another one is super important. Don't use the research as the command tool, like a traffic light, like a go or no go. Research just inclines you to the decisions. It actually gives you some ideas how to improve, but it's just it reflects the part of the marketing mix, not necessarily the full solution. And therefore, we never use the research as a go or a no-go decision, but rather than just as a learning tool. So that's actually it from me. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And
yeah, good stuff, Vadim. Thank you so much. And again, please note your questions. Then we'll pick them up in. I'll try to speed it up a bit for my part, so we have at least 10 minutes for the Q&A. I think now we have come to a stage where Ali has presented like what could be the ideal process from end to end. We have heard a life experience, but what I think is coming again and again is the fact that we need to get under the skin with our consumers. So for us to develop something that will be sticky out there, that will actually drive trial, we need to understand what the consumer tensions are. And essentially what we're trying to do, and what Vadim is also really putting emphasis on here, is to understand how can we mix of functional spaces or attributes, benefits, together with the emotional elements that we know connects to consumers. And this is what it's all about when it comes to the exact concept writing. And then just to complement Vadim, I agree with you. Of course, research should never be the only stand one decision information that you do in your decision making. Of course, there are other things as well. So how easy for you is it to produce? What is the profitability? What is the potential out there? Do you have good margins, etc.? But what research definitely can do is to help you prioritize, but also help you prioritize on how to optimize, as you state, Vadim. What we don't do is that we can actually do quite accurate forecasting in the very end. So if going in with a big investment to invest in a new production facility or similar, we can actually help forecast to understand, is it worth the investment? So that might actually be a place where the research outcome might be a good indication of whether this should be something you should proceed with or not. So in the tail of an innovation process, I know, of course, in the end, Vadim showed a creative universe here where you have communication. That is eventually what you will have in the market and the products on the shelf. But before that, in the innovation process, we will have ideas, we have found out what to prioritize, but how do we actually articulate these into consumer-centric concepts that we can then test with them to understand, one, will this make a drive trial? Will they actually change their behavior, so buy this instead of what they buy today? And two, how can we optimize? So it's, again, it's not only the no-go or go or no-go, it's actually how can we increase the chances of success in the market. So essentially the basics of a concept is to explain the consumers what's in it for them. We need to explain the product to the consumer in a way that they can relate to, but also in a realistic way. So remember that product concept writing is not about marketing as such. It's not about the creative video that Vadim showed. That can come at a later stage. Now we need to explain to them quite clear what is this product about, both emotionally and functionally. So essentially it should answer the question for them, what's in it for me and why should I believe it? And essentially, why should I buy it? So for a successful concept to be consumer-centric, it has to include a few elements. First of all, the standard structure from Ipsos is that we need a headline. So it should capture the core idea or benefit of the product. But what I think is really important is to note that what we have here in the two columns are what is the commercial aim and what is actually the consumer aim. How will they see this? So obviously for Vadim, it's about to really get the product main idea of benefit to the consumer. But actually for the consumer, it's about grabbing their attention or grab my attention, right? So I think that's important to have in mind. The next one, and this is really about tapping into the tensions in the market. And you don't know the tensions before you have gotten under the skin with your consumers, for example, via qualitative research. So we need to express the consumer's frustration or unmet need. That is Vadim's aim. However, from the consumer, we need to prove them that we actually understand their needs and their frustrations in life. Then we need the benefit, and the benefit, again, from Vadim or marketeer's point of view, it communicates the singular consumer benefit. However, from consumer point of view, it's really how can you answer my needs better than anyone else? Then we have the reason to believe. So the reason to believe, and you can see the ladder now. So we are setting the tension, and then we are providing a solution for that frustration or unmet need, and now we're proving them why can we actually deliver this. So when we talk about the reason to believe, we need to ensure that it's somewhat supported. So for example, in Arla's instance, it could be around that we are farmer owned, and hence we have the local farmers that are already producing the ingredients. That is why we can do it, and not sourced from very far away third world countries. But again, this is where we need to convince the consumers that they can believe in us. And then obviously, what is also essential for consumers is to understand, where can I buy it, in what flavors will it come, and also what would be the price. So just in essence, a really good insight is that you make consumers feel, that's so true, you obviously understand me, that's something I could have said. So getting under their skin, and when you read it as a consumer or interpret it as a consumer, you think, this is about me. So again, to get to this, you really need to understand them, right? Get into their heads. So this is just an example of what in a chocolate universe, what an insight could be. So when I reach for a snack, it's often as a little boost rather than through hunger. I need something that is delicious without being too heavy to lift my mood. That is a really good insight, but we can also make it even more sticky, so consumer friendly. So why is everything so heavy when all I want is a little boost? That is really, so for me, for example, that would be, that's about me, that's so true, I could have said that. And then the next part is to understand that this is where we talk about the functional and the emotional elements. So when it comes to the benefit, your solution on the problem or their frustration, it's about combining the functional element and the emotional element. So in this case, again, with chocolate as an example, the lightest texture of chocolate with the maximum flavor, functional element. The chocolate offers you a moment of relaxation, the emotional element. And combining that into one benefit could be like this. So light texture and intense flavor brings a moment of escape. So again, really tapping into that emotional element rather than just providing a functional, which often when you sit and ideate, this could be the easiest to jump to because this is your solution. Then we have the reason to believe. Again, there are two sort of functions of a reason to believe. The first one is to convince the consumer that what they will receive can actually be delivered. The second one is to provide distinctiveness versus other products in the market. So how are you different from what is in the market? Obviously, that also has to be part of the benefit, but it is essential. So the reason to believe is often where you can provide differentiation. And the reason to believe can come in many different forms. So it could, for example, be an endorsement. So the Danish national team recommends this product because XYZ. But it could also be stories or brand heritage. So again, for example, in Jørgen's example, they are farmer-owned. The farmers already have the yields. So basically, they have the resources available. And we can get them locally. Could also be a logical explanation. If you're now introducing something that is more healthy, it's because we have a new technology that allows us to take out 30% of the sugar, for example. Overall, we see 4 golden rules of concept writing, and I can see time is flying, so I will do it a bit somewhat fast. But overall, we can see that you should keep it about the consumer. And this is not just something we say, it's because we can see from performance of the concepts that we are testing that the more you do this, the more you keep it about the consumer, the more relevant you are. So the more you're tapping into a need for them, and hence they'll replace the products that they buy today. Again, we'll share this after so you can see some of the bullets on how to actually do that. Also, you need to be unique. So you need to ensure that you provide something different from what is in the market. Unless, of course, you have a strategy of going out in the market being a me too for other reasons. Another thing, and this is often where we challenge back our clients a lot, that's about keeping it simple. So I've seen many really long concepts in my time at Ipsos, but what we actually recommend is to try to keep it as short as possible. Get to the essence of what you're providing here. This is what is easy and relatable for consumers. So again, keep it clear and single-minded. Don't have too many different elements in the concepts. Then you don't know what they are responding to. And then another thing that is super important as well when we distinguish between product concept and a creative advertisement. Don't overpromise. So make sure that what you put in the concept you can actually deliver. Because if you're getting a super high trial potential from your concept testing, but when you actually go in the market you cannot deliver what you put in the concept, then it's not realistic a prediction of your success. then essentially what it comes down to is to change consumer behavior. So when you go in with a new product, what you want them to do is either buy it on top of what they buy today, or you actually want them to replace with what they have already in their consumption pattern or repertoire. And that is how we actually assess performance or potential of concepts. So what we do is that we always assess when we test with consumers, what is the relationship between the new product and their existing products. So how do they assess and evaluate the attractiveness versus the barriers of switching from their existing products. And what we believe that we have to do, instead of just relying on a big database benchmark systems of concepts that were never launched, what we do in our testing is that we actually ask the respondent to identify if this new product was not available, what would you buy instead? Because this is eventually what you'll be competing against when you get into the market. We have some point of views on what we should measure about, but essentially you need to meet a need. You need to be distinct, so you need to be providing unique benefits, and then you need to be perceived fair and expensiveness. So there can be strategic reasons for going up or down on these different parameters, and that will eventually be available to you from the test if you're doing that. Again, not too much, but I think just to emphasize that our tests go beyond the go and the no-go decision. We provide you insights on actually how to optimize and how to also further develop to your creative briefs. So what is it in the concept that resonates the strongest with the consumers? What do they find most relevant? What is it that drives differentiation, etc.? So apologies for a lot of speed talk, but we are now close to the end. And my last sentence would be here that now it's your turn. Go innovate. And again, it's, as Vadim said, don't necessarily overinvest in research, but make sure you understand your consumers, and also make sure that you provide yourself the chances for best possible success. So that implies doing a bit of consumer research. So do reach out. And then lastly, I already highlighted the Trends event that will be in December, but we have the next event coming up already here in November, which will be around portfolio management and optimization. So a super interesting topic as well. So note that down. The invite will come out in the next week. So now we have 7 minutes left. So of course people are okay to leave after the 7 minutes. But if you want to stay and we have more questions, then feel free to stay. So now I would like to, first of all, thank you, Vadim, and of course, Ali, for joining today. And then I think let's just open the floor for questions. So I don't know if anyone in here have any specific question, either for me, Vadim, or Ali. Otherwise, we might have some online.
I have some, but there are some.
Yeah.
Vadim, how far are you looking to go in relation to other categories, for example, like snacking?
We are in the middle of creating the long-term pipeline, and we have already some ideas, and that might be one of the solutions. So just we're not like thinking to be locked only in existing categories, like possibly, but it's depends on the strategic choices as well.
Good stuff.
There's one more. How, also for you, Vadim, how different do you see the innovation process for you compared to the rest of Arla?
It's quite difficult because I never been working with other department, and I have nothing to compare with. But what I feel, we're quite agile, and actually we're taking a lot of risks in our business units, and that's actually, it is appreciated, I would say. But again, just in general, we're still a part of Arla, and we are just using the guidelines, and including research guidelines and so on and so forth. But maybe like try to use it creatively.
Yeah, and what I assume also, so from category to category, there are different developments and speed in those developments, right? So plant-based is one of the categories that are really accelerating and has been accelerating. Yeah. And what we also see is that the adoption, so new users coming into the category, is super high. So that, of course, also requires that you need to be nimble, you need to be fast and agile to make sure that you you get on the train before someone else get on the train before you.
So we don't have a lecture to wait. This is all the thing. So that's why we are just allowed to be a bit more like yes.
Good.
We also have a question for Ali. Ali, are you there?
Yeah, I am here. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. The innovation sprint process that you outlined looked very nice, but also very comprehensive. In your experience, do most companies do all of these steps and all the research steps?
Yeah, good question. I'd say we have a standardized process, but I'd be amazed if I could point at 2 projects which were exactly the same. So it does vary every single time. Firstly, in terms of scope, so some people say, actually, we've got a really great machinery for this part, but that early stage of coming up with territories that are truly different, that are based on future, what the future's looking like, and getting that inspiration is the part we struggle with. Others might say, actually, we've got the product, but we need to now kind of perfect the proposition and what it is, and we want to iterate to perfection. We really need that focus. And so you'll often see the scope of what people are doing is different, but also you'll see the way that they attack those challenges differs as well. So in some cases, it's a case of saying, we are going to, what we really want to understand at this stage is what is actually happening on the ground. So a great case they had was with Mars Pet Care and Mars Pet Food, where they looked at what pet owners were actually doing and why they weren't buying pet food, and realized it wasn't because the pet food was too expensive. Actually, it's because it was too cheap and it wasn't fresh food. And so they moved directions in that, and that came from ethnography. Whereas others might say, actually, we don't want to do that type of research. We want to see what people are saying on social, and might use some social intelligence analytics. So it really does vary, I'd say, challenge by challenge.
Unmuted.
I would also say from our experience, so when making a research plan or paradigm for whatever innovation you're working on, it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? So it depends on your context you're coming from, it depends on the product and category you're looking into and the type of consumers, etc. So this is also something that we, of course, help a lot of clients actually outlining when are the most critical points during research, when do we need to check in with consumers. And then obviously some they do more and some do less. I think that's the nature. Also depending on Vadim coming from a big organization with quite some funding, whereas smaller companies having less funding and less money to work with, they need to prioritize in a different manner. Thank you, Ali.
Maybe you came about it now, Jens, but the last question is for you about the stimuli format. So how different do companies go about stimuli format? Like what would a concept look like for a private banking company versus a food company?
Yeah, okay.
So kind of, yeah.
But it's actually an essential question. So I think the elements and the thinking we have been through today remains the same. So you need to understand the consumer frustration or tension or unmet need to be able to provide them with a solution. And then independent on whether you're a food company, financial service, or a digital durable company, you still want to provide them with the functional element of your product and then the emotional connect. But what we do see is that when you are outside of FMCG, we see that the concepts are often a bit more, they are longer because they need more detail. So often you need to describe more. So if you're selling a new vacuum cleaner or a new financial service, there are more details often that you need to specify and outline. Sometimes we also have several boards. There are some cases where you have services you need to explain visually what is the steps that you're going through for consumers, because the essence here is that consumers evaluating your proposition, they need to understand what it is about. Of course, that also has to reflect the amount of information or information you put in there. So I hope that they helped answer the question.
There's one more question from Francine. When identifying opportunity territories, you probably need an idea about functional solution possibilities. Could you illustrate how this is done?
Yeah, I think, Ali, this is probably a spot-on question for you.
Absolutely. I would actually say I don't think you do. I think at this stage you first just need to understand what the opportunity is rather than what are going to be the ways to do it. But I'd say opportunity identification should always sit separately from solutionizing, and that's what gives it it's a problem to be solved, and you may find it's hard to solve that problem. And that will push you to think differently, but that's if anything, that's a good thing. It means that others are probably struggling as well. I think one thing that does sometimes happen, and it's a slight aside, is you might want to understand not how easy or difficult it is to solve the problem, but what's the upside of solving the problem. So whether it's t-shirt sizing or maybe going a bit more specific around the number of people it's impacting and the level of depth that it's impacting them, you can try to understand and dimensionalize, is this opportunity a bigger one for us to focus on versus this one, versus this one, versus this one. So I think that that's a more helpful way of considering opportunity platforms.
Good, makes sense. And so obviously we know from you guys and companies that sometimes it's also about that a new technology or new feature attribute has been discovered in the R&D department, and then we need to build a proposition that fit that, right? But that doesn't imply that you don't have to do the steps of outlining, okay, what are the opportunity areas for this? What hooks should we add to this technology that we have enabled, for example? So spot on, yeah, I fully agree with you.
That's it.
Really good. I think we also hit the 10 mark. So thank you so much everyone online for dialing in, and thank you everyone for being here in person. We really appreciate people coming back face to face. It's super nice. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you Vadim for contributing, and thank you Ali for contributing as well. Thank you.